In capturing the effect of a sunny day, a particularly bright sunny day, the important thing is the bright sunny. And there's no way we're going to achieve a better quality on our paper for bright sunniness than the white paper we have to begin with. And so therefore, it's important that we preserve as much of the paper as possible. And that can mean both being a little more cautious with everywhere where we put our tone, our value, or hatching if we're not going to use ink for our value, as well as our line work, perhaps to keep it just a little bit tidier around the areas that we intend to perhaps more so convey the bright sunny effect than other areas. And of course, with value, with light and dark, it's all about the contrast between light and dark. So we do want to establish some nice dark parts of our drawing that will be in contrast to the lighter parts. And when we look at this reference photo, it's obviously a great sunny day photo because we have a lot of darks in the foreground, and compositionally they work really nicely because they frame the entire scene with a nice area of darkness. And then they also contrast all of the white, which sits nicely in the center of our scene. So it's really obvious. It's up and center, so to speak. At this point, I'm just working on trying to do a relatively simplified drawing for my style in particular, to keep my line work reasonably minimal, but particularly in areas where the bright sunlight is. We're in Paris, if you haven't guessed already, and we're looking up a side street at one of the main domes of the Basilica of Sacré-Cœur, the Basilica of the Sacred Heart. The magnificent white building that sits on the top of Montmartre. So, besides having wonderful contrasts of value, this is a great scene with its perspective angles because they really do give us this focus, these diagonals that approximately head towards the center of the scene and really provide an easy glide for our eyes to get to the perhaps more interesting part, which is the more narrowed laneway as it curves out of sight, and then the looming dome of the basilica at the end of the street. So I'm drawing this actual size, so it's relatively simple just for the vertical alignments and proportions, just to slide along from wherever that detail is in the reference to the paper, and then I really just have to work on my horizontal placement of new elements. I wanted to put the green tape on, so I particularly want to keep my drawing the actual size, because if it becomes too large, then the dark areas so important to this concept will disappear. So now there's some foliage here that I'm just doing that's overhanging. No, it's not overhanging, it's the branches in front of Sacré-Cœur, in front of our view of the drum of Sacré-Cœur. And so now I've got this dome, which is always a tricky shape to draw because it's concave and then convex. So not so great on the left, but I think I'm actually able to disguise that a little bit. Just watch what I do with that section where the lines didn't quite come together as much as I would have liked. So now I'm just trying to create the effect of the architecture. I'm not trying to draw exactly the details. I basically want it to be at a glance. Yes, so there you see me just add in some lines to represent the decorative tile work on the dome, and I think that does manage to disguise the overlap a little bit. It gets lost in the slightly darkened value that we now have on that left-hand side edge of the dome. So now I get to work with the parts I haven't done on the left-hand side, which is a little more complex. Now, a lot of this is in shadow, and the other thing to realize that I tried to keep reminding myself as I drew was that this was all about the value, it was all about the light and dark, and so not to get too hung up with detail. I want to capture as much the overall effect of the street as much as the particular detail. Capturing the effect of a scene is not just capturing the effect of individual elements that might be quite complex, but it's also the overall scene that as a whole, at a glance, at a look, it has the feel of the entire street or whatever view it is, whatever subject it is. So again, you can see me just aligning on the vertical where things are at. I pull some of these things back just a bit too much. They're a little towards this central part I'm on now. It's just a little bit too wide, which meant that the left-hand elements of it are a bit close to that darkened, shaded left-hand side. But never mind. Again, it's a good thing to notice because it reminds us of something to look out for the next drawing we do. But happily, it's not a problem in this drawing because no one but ourselves is going to be looking at and comparing with the reference and thinking, gosh, it's 4 millimeters off. So doing the details now, just on the front of this building, there is some shuttered windows and there is a door, but it's going to be quite dark anyway at the end, so I'm really not going to get caught up in doing this. This took me 30 minutes to do the line work, and then about just over 15 minutes, I think, to do the value, the markers on top. So if that gives you any indication. I have drawn this twice before. I drew this scene as a pencil drawing using a 4x4 grid when I first began drawing my Paris drawings when we came home from Paris in 2018. And then I drew it a second time with ink, but again using a 4x4 grid on the reference and the photo, and using a pencil for an underdrawing, which I then inked over the top of and then erased the pencil. I have a couple of videos on that technique of drawing. There are a few important things to realize and to remember and to do when we draw that way if we don't want to end up with really stiff wooden line work. So I think those couple of videos that deal with drawing over a pencil outline are quite helpful to draw. So we're placing the figures and getting a sense of the laneway as well. Notice that again I avoided doing straight lines along the ground in most of certainly on the left hand side and a bit on the right hand side, because we don't usually get a nice straight line. So now I've switched to my markers, and I start with an N4 on the front here, on the lower section on the right hand side, and then I switch to an N3 above. Now the thing about value, you'll hear me say, is that we really measure value, we see the effect of value according to the values that are around it. And so when we start, it can be difficult to get a sense of, is this as dark as we want to go or not? So I do this here with an N2. So I've got N4, N3 and N2. But I shortly change all of these, not that one or that one, but the first three areas I change all of those and peg them all up one level of darkness, because I decide that it's just not dark enough. It's always a challenge in this sort of video, because depending on the time of day and the lights I'm using and which actual grades of grey marker I'm using, they really do photograph differently. Some of the colours tend to photograph a bit lighter and others tend to photograph a bit darker. And then overall it can look a bit uneven as well. Certain parts sometimes catch more light than others. So I'll just tell you that if you've tried to record yourself, you've probably noticed that it's not always so straightforward. And I use an N6 now for the darkest detail. N6 is as dark as I go in this video and pretty much in every video, because it tends to come up on the camera as black. So there's no point just going to N7, N8, N9, N10, because they'll all look just as black as each other. So I'm onto the left-hand side now. And I go on to some of the further parts up the street. Now, some of the value I'm using for colour, for local colour, so the grey tiles of those roofs that we see side on. And again, I'm trying to keep my line work neat where it touches. Now, you'll see here that, yeah, I've just changed that N2 with N3, and now the N3, though next to it I'm making N4. And if you go back and just watch that bit again, you'll see that when I turn the N2 into N3, it looks fairly similar to what's on the other side. But when I darken what's on the other side just a bit, suddenly it doesn't look as dark, it looks lighter again. And this is the effect I mean when I talk about how we see value depends on the values around it. And so with a scene such as this, it's really good to have time and ink to play around with the values and to keep adjusting them, not to presume that what we do first off will be good enough, particularly if you're like the first half of our drawing, when we're still establishing and trying to work out with regards to our reference exactly what our values will be. So now I've got this dark sign as well, and some shadowed areas under gutters and cornices and all the little overhangs that seem to be everywhere on these buildings. And they're the sorts of details we need to draw. Now again, it's paying careful attention to the shadows on the footpath and to preserve the white slits of light that we see. I think that's pretty important. And now it's time to take off the tape and our drawing is done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, what do you think of this bright sunny day in Paris? Bright sunshine is a great effect to try and capture, and it does require a little bit of discipline, but I'm sure you have that. And of course, you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page. It's a great scene to draw for any reason. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.